Stan, thank you for joining us. We appreciate this.
It's my pleasure.
So I thought we would jump in not with a question about what you do for a living, but can you take us back to the story that a lot of folks don't know about you, which is life with you and Paula, and how you became a caregiver and where it goes from there?
Paula was a very vibrant and vivacious lover of life. In 2007, she had a backache and it wouldn't go away, so she asked me to take her to the ER. I was literally on my way out the door to go to work. And we went to the ER thinking it was some muscle pull or something. It turns out that she had non-Hodgkin's B-cell lymphoma that pretty much congregated in her back first and then spread throughout her body. She got a very successful round of chemo, and it went into remission for about 4 years. And during that time, we lived life to the fullest. We had an RV, we went out west a lot, loved going to the Rockies, and just really had a great time. When the lymphoma returned, it returned with a vengeance. And this was around 2011. So all of the treatments, including the chemo regimen that she had the first time, were unsuccessful. And no matter what the doctors tried, she was just not improving at all. So the last 2 years of her life were a steady decline, and she ended up really needing very intensive care. And because of my involvement with hospice, I was really trying to encourage her to start hospice treatment earlier. But there were a couple of barriers to that. She did not have a 6-month life expectancy prognosis from her oncologist, and she didn't want to give up curative treatment. As her husband and as her caregiver at home, I had to honor those wishes. But what eventually happened was that her condition became so severe, and I needed help, that she agreed at first to try palliative care at home. Fortunately, our local hospice provider, Hospice in Northwest Ohio, we were living in the Toledo area at the time, was one of the early adopters of home-based palliative care. So a nurse would come out, a social worker, and they really did help Paula a lot with keeping some of the pain and symptoms under control. She still kept declining, however, and it got to a point where, not to get too graphic, but lymphoma is very liquidy and it spreads through the body. It got into her spine, it cracked a couple of her vertebrae, and it made her mobility really limited. She really couldn't live the life that she wanted to anymore, and just her condition, she wasn't supposed to get out of bed unless I clamped her into what looked like a plastic turtle shell, tightening it as hard as I could just to protect her spinal cord. So there are a lot of other factors like that that just made her mobility and her quality of life just continually decline. However, I know a lot of caregivers can relate to this. I experienced everything that you read about in the literature. I love the term that I've seen called presenteeism, because I was still going to the office every day. I was physically there. It wasn't absenteeism, but my mind was everywhere but work. I was trying to do a full-time job. I remember sitting next to Paula in the chemo treatment center. She's getting chemo. She was actually knocked out by the Benadryl, and I was able to write like a client's entire website sitting with Paula in chemo. Other times, just the demands of caregiving took me away mentally from my job every day. I had a very generous and gracious employer. She loved Paula, she loved me, so she was very understanding, but I always felt like I was cheating my employer in a way because I just was not able to perform at the level I normally do. A lot of caregivers do experience this, but I had to make a lot of phone calls during the day. In Ohio, at least, the laws were that you couldn't just get a prescription for an opioid pain medicine and take it to the pharmacy. I would have to go physically get it, physically take it to a pharmacist. If they couldn't fill it right away, I had to wait a while or leave and come back. Just a lot of disruptions, and obviously it's a labor of love, but it was just demanding on time and energy. In addition to that, just the act of caregiving is mentally and physically exhausting. It is a labor of love, but just what your body and your mind go through in trying to care for your loved one takes everything you have out of you. Paula was so uncomfortable toward the end that we really weren't even able to sleep in the same bed, and she didn't want to disturb me. So I would sleep in the bedroom directly across the hall. Both doors were open. I had line of sight to her. And I would sleep with one eye open and one ear open just to see if she needed to get out of bed because she couldn't by herself at the end. It was that situation that I practically pleaded with her to let us sign her on for hospice care, if not for herself, then for the benefit of me. And I felt selfish doing that, to be honest, but also for her friends that were helping take care of her too. And she really did agree to do that. This is the part where it sounds almost melodramatic, but it's 100% true. A hospice nurse from Hospice Northwest Ohio was in our home, explained everything one last time to Paula. We'd been through the process with them. Paula signed the documents. She was officially a hospice patient now. The nurse left, and I really don't think it was even 20 minutes after that nurse left that Paula told me she was in extreme pain, and she just was beside herself. I'd never seen her act like that before. She was really tough, and she'd been through a lot of painful things, but she was practically climbing the walls. And I called 911. Ambulance came and took her straight to an ER. We found out that she had a pulmonary embolism. And they gave her medicines, and in the ER, she gained consciousness only long enough, and I was right by the bedside, but it was reassuring, even though she had signed the papers and even though I had medical power of attorney. The ER doc, who had great bedside manner, I saw Paula's light come back in her eyes and her eyes focus one last time, and the doctor was able to ask her, I see that you have agreed to be on hospice, do you still abide by that? And Paula was actually able to say yes or nod her head, give an affirmative answer twice. And I was there, her best friend that was helping take care of her was there, her stepson was there. And it was reassuring for all of us to see Paula come back into her own eyes and give that permission.
Tell me about Paula's move from the hospital to the hospice home.
We went to a beautiful inpatient facility. And here's the other part where if things could have been better, I would have changed it if I could. As much as I've been a really strong advocate for early enrollment in hospice and getting all the benefit you can, Paula was only on hospice care 36 hours before she died. And everyone told me that that was the situation. And thankfully, we did have those 36 hours for family. A lot of her family was in the Toledo area. My son came up from Florida, and others came from, rather far away. But those 36 hours gave time to gather in a very beautiful environment, very peaceful, and be able to say goodbye. One of my regrets, and it's not for myself, but Paula was never really ever to say goodbye back because she was still unconscious. And she really never gained that lucidity that I saw for 15 seconds in the ER. It just so happened that everyone else had left the room. And you hear these stories a lot that people sometimes wait for other people to die or other people to leave or to be totally alone before they let go. I was in the room all by myself with Paula, watching her breathe more slowly and more slowly. And I was holding her hand, and I knew she could hear me, and I just told her it was okay to go. And she did. One amazing thing that happened was there was right next to her room a family waiting area that looked like a big living room with a kitchen and everything. My son and stepson were both in there, and Paula's room and that family room both looked out through a window on this really beautiful courtyard. And right after I knew that Paula took her last breath, my son and stepson came flying around the corner into the doorway. It was like 15 seconds later, and their eyes were as big as saucers. And they said, "Did she just die?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, we were looking out the window, and this was a perfectly calm, cloudless, beautiful sunny day. But this courtyard had a gate, and they both happened to be looking out the window, and that gate, unattended, flew open and slammed back shut." There's no earthly explanation for it. But Paula always was a flamboyant person, and I think that was her exit to show her son and stepson that she was leaving this world to go into other places.
She was less than subtle.
Yes, no one would have ever accused Paula of being subtle, for sure.
That's a powerful story, Stan. How did you feel after Paula passed?
When Paula died, there was a sense of relief. And there was the relief that she was released from the pain and the suffering. But I don't think I'm the only caregiver, if we're really being honest with ourselves, to say I felt a sense of relief for me. Because of that treadmill that I was talking about being on and really having to just constantly be on, and even overnight, keeping one eye open and one ear open. And when you realize you're feeling that way, then that makes you feel guilty and selfish.
Yeah.
And it's not like you want your wife to pass away, but because of the circumstances, you do have this sense of relief, not only for her, but for yourself. So those were a lot of the emotions and the realities that I found myself dealing with.
So at one point you sent me a picture of her playing the drums.
Yeah.
World-class drummer?
No. That was the other thing. Even though this was, I think, during her remission, and Paula was only 51 when she died. But she was in her late 40s, and she decided, I play guitar, she decided she wanted to be my drummer. And she went and bought this really nice, red pearl drum kit. It was in our house, and she took lessons, and she really never got very good, but God bless her. God bless her for trying. I mean, she gave it her best, but that was it. She was always moving forward, never moving backwards. And that was an inspiration to me. We're talking about my transition after she died. There were great moments of grief and profound feelings of sadness and loss, but I kept moving forward too. And I think there are a lot of people that may look at their marriages and the struggles that happen with illness and have a lot of regrets. I'm very fortunate to say that I don't. Paula and I lived a very full life together. I wish things had turned out differently and her illness wasn't so agonizing for her, but wow, did she make the best of the situation and rode that wave to the very end. And that has been always a major inspiration for me as I started to put the pieces together and figure out what to do next. And that was just live each day, each moment to its fullest, because that's really what she did.
If you could share one thing, having been through the experience of being the caregiver and then being the bereaved, if you will, if you wanted to share with healthcare professionals, be they hands-on providers or leadership and administrators, any advice that you would give our healthcare community on how to create a better experience, a different experience?
Our whole business talks a lot about patient-centered care and family-centered care. And a lot of providers do a good job, but it's interesting to me because a lot of times we try to define the patient experience, but it's really not from the patient and family perspective. It really is, what can we do clinically to really help you out? And even our language, we admit you to our program sort of thinking. I really wish that providers of any part of the system would start much more by letting the patients and families talk to them with very open-ended questions and genuinely listen to what they have to say. Some of the physicians that I've met in my career that have the best practices for that, that's their whole approach. And many of them are part of medical centers. They see that the way patients and families are communicated with, and they admit that these are their peers, and the peers don't even recognize that it's a problem. But again, it's this medical team coming in and saying, here's the situation, what do you want to do? And the family's dumbstruck. They don't know. The best physicians I've seen start the whole conversation by flipping that on its ear and saying, I have your mom's medical records. I see her charts. I was actually part of the team that cared for her, so I know her medical treatment. But I really don't know her as a person. What was she like? You started this conversation with me, asking me what Paula was like, what she liked to do, before we got into the details of her illness. And to me, that's a perfect model, because once people start talking about their mother or their spouse as a person, or their own experience, that helps unveil very organically what their wishes and goals are. And when you ask point blank, if your mom, we don't know how long she has to live, but what do you think she would love to do with the rest of her life? Mm-hmm. And again, having the patient and family say, well, this is what we would really like to see happen. Many, many, many times, they are describing the exact scenario that hospice and palliative care afford to that patient and family. They're scared of the H word. Right. They don't know what palliative care is, but they can describe it when you ask them to explain it from their own perspective in their own language. A lot of times when you have a caregiver, a doctor's appointment, let's say, or a professional caregiver comes into your home, they have a task to do. They have clinical protocols to meet. They have compliance issues to meet. I get all that. But please, can we first talk about, if we're going to say it's the patient's perspective, the patient experience, can it start from the patient's real perspective and ask them what it is, instead of telling you all the ways I can help you before I know your wants and needs and goals and wishes.
Stan, thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you also for sharing Paula's story, and appreciate the gift of yourself.
Thank you. It was really my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity. I've told Paula's story quite a bit because I know that she would want to educate others through her own experience, and this has been a great opportunity to do that. Thank you both.